Hello, it's me. Hi, I can't believe anybody's here. Also, let me know if you can hear me. That's like the most important. First things first. Let me know if you can hear me. I'm so nervous, you guys. Um, Sorry if I'm weird. I'm so nervous. I'm like glad that this is over the computer because I have stress sweats. I have stress sweats. What's up? Hello, everybody. Hi. I was like, hey, all the homies are here. Hello. I'm so excited to see your, I want to say faces, but it's like your usernames in the chat. Um, hey, yeah, it's so nerve-wracking. Like, what the fuck? I I feel like I'm pretty okay at Twitter because I can like think about stuff before I say it, and like I literally will like use Grammarly. I'm like researching, and even then I still have a million typos. But just to like speak, I'm like I'm a goober. I might. Hopefully I don't say anything that's too not good. Hopefully I make sense. Hopefully y'all learn from this. If not, we're vibing. We're hanging out. But thank y'all so much for being there. Hi, I'm emotional. I can't believe anybody showed up. I'm so gassed that anybody's here. I'm really flattered. Okay. Let me stop being wild. Oh, this is so nice. Yeah, I worked pretty hard on this PowerPoint. I'm real rusty. I've been out of school. I dropped out of college like 5 years ago. So I'm a little rusty. When it comes to like giving a presentation. But I got my notes. Also, I have a hard time concentrating on stuff. So I've got like 8 tabs open right now. This is going to be a ride, but we're in this together. We're in this together. Okay, let's start. Hi. Thank you so much for hanging out. Listen, I was really sad when I dropped out of college. It was because I did not have enough money to pay for it anymore. And it was less like I dropped out and more of they kicked me out because I couldn't pay to be there anymore. And I was really sad about it. But I think I turned out okay. You can always go back. But anyways, school, the fact that we have to pay for it, we're leftists here. That bourgeois shit. Um, Anyways, today we are going to be talking about captive genders, trans embodiment, and the prison industrial complex. I thought that it would be dope. I love this book. This is my second time reading it. It's also Pride Month. And I want to talk about the radical and revolutionary origins of pride and how fucking dope queerness is. You know? You know. I was a psych major. So it's funny that you should say a useless psych degree. After I dropped out, I remember my first job. One of my coworkers left and I got promoted to her job and she had a psych degree. So I was like, I guess we all ended up in the same place, didn't we? Um, Anyways, I'm just talking about my life. But yes, captive genders, trans embodiment, and the prison industrial complex. Here we go. And I did try to get a captioning app. It is not working because I'm not good at the internet. I'm going to troubleshoot that. I was troubleshooting it for the last 10 minutes, could not get it to work. I really hope for the next stream that it will be up, and I'm really sorry. But my goal is to keep these recordings, edit them up a little bit, and then put them on YouTube with the captions on there. Also, the presentation and the notes that I'm using for this presentation, you can DM me and I will just send them to you if you want to read them. That's not a problem. Hi. Hello. Okay. I feel like every time someone new shows up, I'm like, what's up? What's up? Thanks for the follows. Thanks for taking the time to be here out of your busy lives. I appreciate that. Let's get into it. Okay, so trigger warning. So this book is about how the prison industrial complex and policing impacts trans people, especially poor trans people of color, disabled trans people, and I think I already said poor trans people. So basically, long story short, this shit is really heavy. We're going to talk about police brutality. We're going to talk about sexual assault. We're going to talk about physical assault. We're going to talk about depression. So if any of these things are triggering to you, if at any point you feel triggered and you feel the need to go, take the time for yourself. If you feel like you need to go right now, no offense at all. I hope y'all put yourselves first. This shit is really heavy, but it is really important to talk about, which is why I'm talking about it. But once again, please put yourselves first. Be aware. I'll try to trigger warn as I go too, as we get into the really heavy stuff, but I just wanted to start off with that right off the bat. Cool. So basically we're going to go through this chapter by chapter. This is going to be part 1 of 2 to 4. We'll see how far we get today. This book is like 400 pages. So there's a lot of really important material in here. Woo! All right, so we're going to get into the introduction. Yes, of course, trigger warnings are important, and I think that we should be aware that everybody has different trauma that they're carrying. So thank you for thanking me. Good evening. Yes, so the introduction. So we're going to talk about the narrative of violence, the Stonewall riots, and neoliberal nonprofits. So violence against queer folks has not changed much since the Stonewall riots. Ooh, we've got a pop-up on my computer. So violence against queer folks has not changed much since the Stonewall riots, but the conversations around that violence have changed. While Stonewall was not the first time queer folks fought back, it is often seen as the catalyst in the popular narratives pushed by a lot of liberal queer rights organizations. They often de-radicalize the Stonewall riots, and they push this false linear narrative that like queer people were being treated badly, and then they fought against it, and now it's over. And we all know that that's not true. And let's see, police and prison abolition is imperative to the liberation of queer people. Once again, I'm going to be digging on neoliberal queer organizations a lot today. But because they work with the state to convince queer people that hate crime laws are the way to keep queer people safe. In reality, hate crime laws do not reduce targeted violence, but instead they increase the reach of the prison industrial complex, which increases harm, especially when you consider that the prison industrial complex and policing targets people of color, targets poor people, and targets queer people. It's not the move to make it easier for people to be imprisoned and to give cops more power. Abolish the police, abolish prisons. You know what I mean? I appreciate that y'all are here for this. And one of the most volatile points of contact between state violence and the body is gender. The prison industrial complex, or PIC, which I'll probably be using moving on, so I'm not saying prison industrial complex over and over and over again. It's basically set up to imprison people violently. And once again, people of color face disproportionate prison sentences. People are sexually assaulted in prison. The access to medical care is borderline non-existent, and abolitionists works rarely write about queer prisoners, which is why we're here today to talk specifically about that intersection. All right, so gender lockdown. So basically, while we're going through this text, we have to acknowledge that gender self-determination. So basically, gender identity is not only personal, but it is formed with other forms of power, and the words we use to describe ourselves differ culturally, generationally, and geographically. So even in this text, as I was reading it, it was written in 2000, there were terms that I was like, we don't really say that anymore. I feel like that's a little offensive. Or terms that I had never heard before, because gender is like far-reaching. I probably did. am, I probably did spell surveillance wrong, or I did spell surveillance wrong, but I am really, there are going to be so many typos in here. I ran it through Grammarly, but it doesn't always slap. Y'all know what I mean. It'd be like that sometimes. So chain link. So once again, we're talking about the prison industrial complex today. We could do an entire stream on just that, because it is a very vast topic. And then out loud life. So queer people are basically born into surveillance, with our genders being decided for us before we were even born. And we're policed about how we act. You know, women are supposed to act this way. If you have this genitalia, you're a woman. Men are supposed to act this way. If you have this genitalia, you're a man. And queer folks are often punished for not performing those heteronormative expectations in school and at home. Gender roles are not sick. They are. I recently saw the idea that one can identify as two-spirited unless they are indigenous. That seems good. Yes, precisely. There are certain genders that are cultural, which is a great example of what I was talking about when it comes to gender self-determination. Entirety of femininity. This is, I guess I should read these out loud. This has reminded me of a wonderful paper I read describing the entirety of femininity as a social enforced prison. 100%. I think that gender, when it's something that you determine for yourself, can be super empowering. But when you force people into roles based on something as arbitrary as like one area of your body or certain genitalia, like how is that going to be good for anybody? Desiring abolition. Abolitionists know that the prison industrial complex is not broken and in need of reform, but is working as it's intended. I feel like a lot of folks that push reform kind of push that like it's just a few bad apples narrative when it comes to police and when it comes to bad correctional officers. But the point of the matter is that imprisoning people and policing are inherently violent. And they're working as intended, and you can't reform something that's already inhumane. It must be abolished. But yeah, all right. So we're going to get into section 1. Out of time, from gay liberation to prison abolition. The whole capitalist system is the bad apple. Period. It's the whole bad tree. It's the whole farm. But yeah. All right. Hello. All right. Building an abolitionist, trans, and queer movement with everything we've got. So first, we're going to start talking about neoliberalism and the de-radicalizing of queer politics. When the U.S. queer liberation movement began, it was led by poor queer and trans people of color, mostly Black and brown trans women that were also sex workers. And instead of a revolutionary movement focusing on improving the lives of poor and working class people, which is where queer liberation began, we are now seeing liberals co-opt these movements and center around things like gays in the military. Who wants to do that? Marriage equality, which is playing into an institution that is a part of capitalist heteropatriarchy. And so there are some amazing folks that are fighting back, because I didn't want to actually show pictures of like that rainbow capitalism bullshit. So we're talking about, you know, queer liberation, not rainbow capitalism. And we have like no pride for trans women in ICE detention centers, because at the end of the day, we should be focusing on the queer people that are having the hardest time, not centering these like very middle class, very bourgeois policies that don't actually help a majority of people. We can always get a shout out for Black and brown trans women and sex workers. We're just going to take a quick moment right now to talk about Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera that used the money from their survival sex work to fund a home and a place to live for trans people that didn't have anywhere to go. So they literally didn't have much money, You're working survival sex work to survive, and you're using that money to uplift your own community and to help unhoused trans people of color. That's dope. So we can always shout out Black and brown trans women that are sex workers all day and every day. So the text has a whole, I don't want to call this a graphic. I cannot think of what this is called right now. But a chart of big problems we see in our society, the official solutions that are pushed by a lot of heavily funded neoliberal queer rights groups, and more transformative approaches. So we have like queer and trans people, poor people, people of color, and immigrants have minimal access to quality healthcare. The official solution that are pushed by organizations like HRC talks about legalizing same-sex marriage to allow people with health benefits from their jobs to share that with their same-sex partners, which is not enough. I mean, Medicare for all is the bare minimum. And one thing that I will say in this text, that even some of the transformative approaches kind of skirt around the fact that we are living in a white supremacist, imperialist, capitalist police state, and that must also be abolished for all people to be free. But I do think these transformative approaches are definitely a step in the right direction, but not necessarily the final step. So how did we get here? How did we get to this point where we feel like in the popular narrative, queer liberatory politics have been de-radicalized? So one, the active resistance by radical movements to state violence received backlash from the state. That's how this works, is people fight against the state and then they work with everything they have to push those people back into the margins. And then you also see this growth in global capitalism. And all the tactics that they use to do this are not new, they just keep being refined over time. So one of the first ones that we're used to, of course, is bootstrap theory. The US government and its allies pass laws that make it harder for workers to unionize. They create international economic policies and trade agreements that reduce safety nets, workers' rights, and environmental protections, particularly for nations in the global south. And they cut welfare programs, they cut any kind of social security programs, and they claim that needing help or just anything that helps the people is people being lazy or people asking for handouts, when we know that that is not true. Scapegoating, we all seen this. They criminalize poverty. They criminalize people of color. And they say that the issue is not the capitalists up top and the 1% that are hoarding money and resources for everyone else. The issue is immigrants, or the issue is unhoused people, when once again, we know that that's not true. They also use fear-mongering. They use things like the war on drugs and the war on terror to weaponize fear, push racist stereotypes, and oftentimes get people to go along with imperialism and disgusting acts in other countries. And then we also have the myth that violence and discrimination is just about bad individuals. Instead of analyzing how systems oppress marginalized people, they frame racism, sexism, and etc. as moral failings that only, certain people have. And they push hate crime laws and a lot of reactionary policy that often takes place after shitty things have already happened. Instead of analyzing how systems affect marginalized people, they frame it as like one person is being racist and they're mean to you, and that sucks. And violence is one person being shitty to another person. They don't acknowledge that poverty is violence. They don't acknowledge that things like redlining are violence. Not giving people healthcare, that's all violence. It's not just about interpersonal acts between people. And they undermine transformative organizing. We've seen leaders that are murdered and criminalized. We still have people from the Black Panthers that are in jail to this day. And nonprofits and charity foundations are created and are seen as the appropriate way to go about creating change in the world. Yes, they make it an individual thing rather than systemic. And another thing they do is they utilize the hero mindset, where they use achievements of singular people to hide inequality. That's when you have people that say, like, racism is over, Obama was president, um, or they talk about one person of a marginalized group somehow making it, and that's the American dream, and everyone else just isn't working hard enough, which once again goes back to bootstrap theory. And the purpose of these tactics is to combine and de-radicalize movements and be counter-revolutionary. So it's up to us to reclaim our radical legacies. So how do we counteract all of the shitty things that the state does to keep us down? One, liberation is a collective process. It's important to build non-hierarchical movements where group awareness and consensus is valid, solidarity with comrades is valued, and a problem affecting one is a problem that affects everybody. Trickle up change. We must start by improving the material conditions of those that are the most marginalized and organize with them in solidarity. Be careful of all welcome mats. Be critical of the folks that you allow to enter your movement, because if you allow, for example, white supremacists to enter your movement, it can quickly become de-radicalized. And let's practice what we preach. Hello, praxis. Like, that's like every leftist is constantly talking about praxis. As fun as it is to be on stream and talking to y'all and hanging out and to, go on Twitter and type things, you also have to be out in the world doing mutual aid, and really working with your community. Real safety means collective transformation. Marginalized communities already have ways to deal with conflict without the police and the prison system. And the prison system and the police have always caused harm. So that's when you get into things like restorative justice. And the reason that I have woman, race, class here, I'm like pointing here like it's over there. Yeah. Is because I think that this book also breaks down a lot of the things listed here. And I heavily recommend reading it. I was able to hang out on Gomer's stream a while back to talk about it. But this is a really impactful book. All right, Resisting the Traps, Ending Trans Imprisonment. So we refuse to create deserving versus undeserving victims. I think a lot of the time we see people getting trapped into talking about specifically, for example, police brutality in a certain way. You'll see that some victims are framed as like they were innocent, they were unarmed, they were just minding their business, they contributed to their community, and so they shouldn't have been murdered. But the reality is that, let's say, even if they were armed, even if they weren't the best person, even if nobody liked them, the police should not be able to kill people with impunity. When we say that some victims are deserving and some are undeserving, you play into the idea that policing is a valid way of handling conflict within a community. We support strategies that weaken institutions and not strengthen them. We want to abolish the prison industrial complex, not reform it. Reformers may offer versions of prisons and policing that are trans inclusive, but those in the long term will empower the prison industrial complex to continue and exploit and harm communities. It has been proposed to build prisons were just for queer people, but at the end of the day, we don't need to be building any more prisons. We need to acknowledge why there are so many trans people and queer people in prisons to begin with. But we'll get into that as we move forward. We see ending trans imprisonment as a part of larger transformation. The police are a violent and occupying force. And so the next bit is, so you think we're impossible. And I do have an Assata Shakur quote here. We love Assata Shakur. Part of being revolutionary is creating a vision that is more humane, that is more fun too, that is more loving. It's really working to create something beautiful. So I think when you talk about abolition, people are very quick to be like, that's crazy. But I mean, as leftists, when you talk about communism, people are quick to say, that's crazy. It's not possible. But the truth of the matter is, all the homies love Asada Shakur. Period. That we shouldn't be shy away from building a more just world just because it's difficult. And that if we work focusing on improving the material conditions of people, if we work to build stronger communities, to build dual power, to help our communities be educated and self-sufficient, then we can begin to rise against imperialist, capitalist, and white supremacist forces and create a world that actually is for the people. So, we're going to talk about street power and the claiming of public space, San Francisco's Vanguard, and pre-Stonewall queer rebellion. And we will be talking about police violence in this portion, so just be aware of that. So, around 1965 to 1970 in San Francisco's Tenderloin District, a group of gay and trans folks that were mostly sex workers formed a socio-political organization known as the Vanguard. They resisted unequal treatment of marginalized genders and the economic and state-sponsored violence against gay and trans youth. Their work produced radical insights on the connections between economic class, police violence, incarceration, and homophobia. They furthered the youth outreach that was already being done, typically by the owners of gay bars, in support of gay and trans youth, by giving queer folks a safe space to exist and therefore giving them the space to organize. So the first political action of the Vanguard was the Compton Cafeteria Riot, which took place before the Stonewall riots. So the story behind the Compton Cafeteria Riot, the Compton Cafeteria was an all-night diner in the Tenderloin District and a popular hangout for queer youth. The night manager was an older gay man that sympathized with the youth and wanted them to have a safe space. This is my first stream. After he passed away, the new manager they hired at the diner started to heavily discriminate against the LGBTQ youth that would hang out there. He hired private security to harass them. He would remove them if they stayed too long, if they were too loud, or they didn't spend enough money. And they were upset at their sudden violent exclusion from one of the few safe spaces they had, and they organized a 2-hour picket on July 18th of 1966. When they were picketing, the management of the Compton Cafeteria called the police to remove the protesters. As we all know, police are violent forces. When they showed up, they started to use excessive force on one of the drag queens, and she fought back, as she should. And this was the beginning of the Compton Cafeteria Riot. The action showed them the way police protect Capitol and the connection between police violence, homophobia, and classism. And so following that, they continued to organize. In autumn of 1966, the Vanguard held their own street sweep in response to the targeted harassment that they were subjected during police street sweeps. So basically what they did, we have a picture of it here, is they publicly were cleaning the street in the Tenderloin District with signs saying all trash is before the broom, to basically show that they were being treated like garbage when in fact they were human beings. In addition to public protests, they made a sign where they campaigned against police brutality and shared community organizing tips. And basically the Vanguard helped foster a sense of community and held events that gave queer unhoused youth places that felt like home. I think that we can learn a lot from the Vanguard, and also the ways that policing then is the same as policing now. The way that a lot of queer youth were treated back then and are still treated now mirrors things like stop and frisk, where basically cops have the right to just stop Black people and pat them down on the streets because they look suspicious. It also talks about the over-policing of sex workers and the sweeping of unhoused folks that I see a lot in LA. And other important queer groups are the Daughters of Bilitis, the Machine Society, and the Street Orphans. We will not be talking about them today, but heavily recommend looking them up and learning about them. The Vanguard shows us that the most marginalized in the community are the ones who can lead people to liberation. That's right, Jason. Yes, I love that. 100%. It shows that the most revolutionary actions are led by the people that are actually experiencing the most violence in our communities. So our next chapter is Brushes with Lily Law. So what is Lily Law? So it is a term used to describe laws that are used to target and harass LGBTQ people, particularly drag queens, trans women, sex workers of color. And basically, the political benefits, politicians use harassment and these campaigns of cleaning up the streets to win support from their bases. They did this, once again, as a way to say they're cleaning up the streets, very similar to the way that you'll see a lot of politicians do today. Right around the election, especially in LA, a lot of politicians will have police forcibly move unhoused people from their encampments as a way to show that they're improving by making things better, and basically by making things better for capital, by increasing property value, by treating unhoused people like trash, which is fucked up. Every time a socialist or communist country comes forth, it is pushed down by the CIA, FBI, and military complex, period. Cuba is one example. The Western world has sanctioned, 100%. That is very true. The US is a part of the imperialist core. It is a capitalist country, and it ensures to keep the money flowing. They work their hardest to shut down any sort of communist country right as it begins to form. But yes, and then this chapter, it is a personal narrative. So they have a lot of those in this book, which I think are very important. It basically talks about Lily Law from the perspective of someone that was arrested under these laws. And a lot of the entrapment techniques that they used back in the day, around like the 50s to the 70s, do not exist today. And this is a direct result of the organizing and the riots and all the ways that queer people fought back. But they definitely still over-police trans and queer people. We just know that instead of stopping doing shitty things, they just change them. But it is important to acknowledge all the hard work of our ancestors. So we're going to talk about the Bathhouse raids in Toronto. And once again, this is going to talk about police violence, hate crimes. But yes, so to understand the full picture of the Bathhouse raids in Toronto, we have to think about the historical climate at the time. So federal and provincial human rights legislation did not protect LGBTQ people, and police regularly conducted sweeps during which they would arrest gay men in bathhouses and parks. There was a lot of negative news coverage at the time, fueled with homophobic rhetoric and insinuating that homosexuality leads to criminality. Far-right Christian groups in the US pushed to snuff out the rights of queer people, and right-wing politicians were using homophobia to win elections. They thought that pushing sweeps and cleaning up neighborhoods would be good publicity for the party. Sounds very similar to what we have going on presently, if you ask me. So police brutality. The fundamental role of police, and a role that they by no means monopolize, is the maintenance of order and the guaranteeing of security for capital. They protect property. They protect the wealthy. Spaces where queer people could connect, affirm their humanity, and organize were seen as a threat and criminalized. Queerness was, and often still is, linked to criminality and disease. The raids were called Operation Soap. During these raids, police were excessively violent, like they always are, beating people and shouting slurs at them. They took down the information of everyone present so they could out them to their employers and get them fired, and out them to their families and get them ostracized by their community. Police were there to intimidate, humiliate, and control gay male space and sexuality. Queer people were, and they still very much are, a scapegoat to blame social ills on. So resistance. So to get into the Bathhouse raids themselves. At midnight on February 6th, less than 24 hours after the raids, they quickly organized a demonstration of 3,000 queer people, and they took over one of the main downtown intersections. They went down Young Street and onto the fifth, and in front of the 52nd Division Police Station, which is where they had booked the men that they had arrested at the Bathhouse riots. Their attempt to subjugate queer people had the opposite effect. Basically, they thought the Bathhouse riots was a way to control queer people and to shame them into hiding. But what happened is we came together and we marched down these streets and we walked right up to that police station. We said, fuck y'all, we have a picture. Here. And while lesbians were not at the raids, they were aware of what it felt like to have the state police your body and sexuality. There were also cishet immigrants, sex workers, and all kinds of people that were at the march because they all recognized that police brutality affected their communities and they wanted to fight against it together. But what happened is after that march, there were internal divisions. Many of the victims of the Bathhouse raids were middle class, cis, white men. And it was the first time that they had ever experienced a huge violation at the hands of the state. And so in the organizing aftermath, the experiences of Black and Indigenous people of color, LGBTQ people, the experiences of women, and the experiences of trans folks and gender variant folks were not centered and were not supported. So basically, police brutality is very much an intersectional issue that affects folks of all kinds of different identities. And police brutality can be an issue that brings everybody together. It depends on how we talk about it and how we organize around it and who we center. Oh, dip! We're on to section 2.
Hello, it is editing Chantilly. Using Photo Booth, which I haven't done in like a decade. I feel like I'm going to post for MySpace, and I thought if we're using Photo Booth, I'm going to use one of those little face effect things, which I'm slightly regretting, but we're going to commit. But anyways, the stream basically ended there. After that, we were just chatting. But if you want to hear about Captive Genders Part 2 and the rest of it, the stream will be this upcoming Sunday at 4 p.m. PST. I'll be streaming Theory every Sunday at 4 p.m. PST. But thank y'all for hanging out. And like, comment, subscribe, do all those YouTube things. Thank you very much. It helps with the algorithm. I also have a Patreon, which will be linked down below. My social media will be linked down below if you want to keep up with me and see more of this. Anyways, thank y'all so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Also, this video would not have been possible without all the help from our amazing viewers like you, and a special thanks to our patrons. Oh yeah.
Six, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. I've been chasing numbers on the side. Been collected, rolling through the tide. Everybody trying to change their life. I'm not trying to waste mine. Time's not homicide, homicide. I'm not satisfied. I I'm overdraft and overdrive. I'm never satisfied. 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. I paint a lot of pictures in my mind. I just gotta realign. I've lost count of all my lives. I think I may be way past number 9. Time's 9, homicide, homicide. I'm not satisfied. I'm overdraft and overdrive. I'm never satisfied. Why? 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm afraid of running out and letting everybody down. Can't keep chasing clouds. Everybody's running now.